Your neighborhood schools is the best boundaries to make to a neighborhood school. Now, I'm the first one to understand sometimes you got a family that has a home here and they drive past the school on their way to their school. Because what ends up happening is as we build schools, and this happens in every community, I can promise you, when I was in Nevada, when I was in Maryland, some of the same issues. You build a school at the time where you need the school, where the growth is and where the demand is that population requires us to build a school. And then population continues to change, population shift, population increase in certain areas, and certainly in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, we've seen a boom of population in the north and the south. Well, you still have your buildings here, even though you have populations of students here. And so you simply can't build enough schools to get to the populations where the students are. And so ultimately you have to try to use your assets, which one of them, of course, is a school building. So you have to try to do as good a job as you can, as quality a job as you can, of creating zones so that even though you've got a mass of students here, and what happens is when you get a mass of students here and you have an overcrowded school, and we go to a community meeting, everybody in the auditorium says, you need to do something about this. We don't want all these trailers. We need to reduce the number of students here. Well, okay. Well, that means that if we can't build a school right away, what do? We rezone that school, and we try to get the students that are closest to that school over there, which has space, to that school so that we can reduce the crowd here. Now, the people who stay at this school and the overcrowding comes down, everybody's cheering. But for the people who are zoned to the other school, they're probably concerned because they're not at the school that they're closest to. And so I certainly understand the frustration, but understand that's not a CMS issue only. That happens all across the country. Now, what we're going to do, and the board has looked at this, the board actually several years ago said we understand the concern that has happened over the last several years about fears about our school boundaries moving. And so what the school board established was something called guiding principles. And what they said is we're going to, at a time period where we've had somewhat stable growth, not to be trying to change boundaries unless there is some really, really compelling reason that meets the needs of these guiding principles. And so we're actually at a time period where we are trying not to do as many boundary changes because the public has clearly said that has been frustrating to them. Now, we are in the process right now of examining that particular process. We are right now getting ready to present to the board in January plans around the next 10-year capital budget. And that capital budget is where would we look to build new schools? What would that impact be? So we're looking at all those things, but in the meantime, what we have an obligation to try to do is to make every school where we have students, whether it's overcrowded, whether it is the closest to the neighborhood, be the best school we can be. I was at North Meck High School last week. It was an extraordinary visit. I was really excited and saw some amazing teaching. As every time I talked to students, and I didn't just talk to the students that were there to greet me, I talked to students in the hallway, I talked to teachers. There's a lot of pride in the school. There's a lot of people very happy with North Meck. I'm sure there are people that want it to be better. I think every principal wants the school to continue to be better. We will focus on trying to make North Meck continue to be better and better, the same way we will make that commitment to every single school. A population that right now it's kind of hovering on, okay, is that enough to sustain the school? If 3 charter schools were to open up in that exact area, is that a school that right now we would want to build a brand new school, or do we need to wait to see how those charters would impact? So that's part of the frustration of how we do charters in North Carolina is we have very little control over that. Matter of fact, we have very little. We get a chance to say, here are our thoughts about this particular charter. They can be considered, they may not. But the charter comes, and then what's the standard to make sure that the charter is of quality? So we're looking at all of those things, and so I'll just share a couple of reflections. When people ask me, what are my thoughts about charter schools? I actually am an advocate for quality charter schools. My concern is that when you look at the national research, and if you ever saw the movie Waiting for Superman, which everybody says, oh, what a great movie to champion charter schools. Well, I always say, did you see the same movie I saw? Because what Waiting for Superman put out was the same statistic that is across the country. And it showed that charter schools usually are no better and often worse than the public school that it's saying it's an option for a parent to go to. And so out of every 5 charter schools, only 1 outperforms its local school. And usually that is one that gets a lot of private money. 2 perform exactly the same, and 2 perform significantly worse. So out of 5 bites of the apple, only one of the 5 options give you better, 2 give you exactly the same, 2 give you worse. So I question in North Carolina why we're in such a mad rush to want a charter and think that more charters is necessarily a good thing. If we make sure that we're thoughtful and that the charters that we're putting in are quality charters, and then to establish ways for there to be better partnering between the public schools and the charter schools, I think that will be a positive thing, because see, my philosophy at the end of the day is they're all our students. When I was in Reno, Nevada, when I got to the school district, there were 8 charter schools sponsored by the school district. And as part of our reforms that we engaged in Nevada, partly was to create a state-sponsoring charter school district. And every one of the 8 charter schools that we had in our district had the option of going to that state agency. Not one chose to do that. And when they were asked why, they said because we get great support from the school district. There was great collaboration everywhere, from the school board, the superintendent, to services. What I always said to our charters is I can't spend any money that we get on the students that we are dedicated to serve. So I can't do something that's going to cost us $1. But if there's things that we can do in partnership that don't cost us money, we're always going to work in partnership. And we prove that over and over and over again. So, I think what we're looking at right now is the impact of the charters. What's that going to mean in terms of enrollment, future school construction, schools' choices in terms of magnet programs. The concept behind charters is that have innovations and flexibility to see if that would drive better student results. Well, then in North Carolina, what I'm going to ask our state legislature is why give anything to a charter school in terms of authority or options that you won't give to a public school? If you're going to have competition, let's make sure it's on an even level playing field. The other thing I would say is that let's make sure that a charter school, which is a public school, stays a public school. Because here's my other concern in North Carolina. We have allowed conditions where a charter school can say no to students. Now remember, a charter school is a public school. It's your tax dollars, it's my tax dollars. Now I respect private school. I understand a private school gets to close the door and say, you know what, sorry, we're not going to educate you. Sorry, you're hard to educate, we're not going to educate you. I respect that. That's private school. But public school, we're like the Statue of Liberty. We take everybody. And so the public charter school has to take everybody. They can't kick kids out when they're challenging. They can't say no because parents sometimes are challenging to work with. They have to take everybody. But we're starting to see charter schools that don't take everybody, or tell kids to go back to public school because they're challenging to educate, or where they're putting things like, we want to be a GT charter school. Really. So, I really want to, I don't mind the competition. I love the competition, I love the playing field. But let's not allow private schools to become public charter schools that the public has to pay for. And we're even seeing examples of where some private schools in North Carolina have become public schools, and we're all paying for that. So I think it's something that we need to look at. Again, I'm a fan of charter schools. Let's just make sure they're good and that they serve all of our public children. We have a lot of different cultures that we have the honor, teacher, and privilege of teaching. And so we have to make sure that as we are aggressively saying we cannot allow bullying or harassment, we can't allow cyberbullying, we also have to be culturally proficient in our schools as well. And so we have to approach this every which way we can. We have to make it a priority. We will do some things. So, for example, there are ways when you deal with a bully, there's 2 things you have to do. We have to make sure there are kids who are victims of hazing or bullying have options where they can tell us, because many kids don't. So we have to have as many different ways in a caring school to let us child know they need to let us know so we can deal with it. But then we also have to address the needs of the bully. And you might say, what do you mean address the needs of the bully? Suspend that kid. Well, suspensions don't do what they used to. And I'm not anti-suspension. I'm just saying any behavioral way that we address misbehavior has to have 2 components. It has to be punitive and it has to be therapeutic. In other words, it has to change the behavior. So we have to have options to get the bully to realize that what they're doing is not good and we're not going to tolerate it. And so having classes that the student is required to go to where they talk about why they're bullying, why that's not acceptable, how they can change their behaviors. And what we often find out about our bullies is they've been bullied, or they come from a family where that has. So we have a lot of ways we have to approach it.